Under a low northern sky in 1939, a new camp opened on the edge of a swampy forest 80 kilometers north of Berlin. Its name was Ravensbrück, built specifically for women. Within 6 years, fences would push into the woods, watchtowers would multiply, and tens of thousands of women and girls from across Europe would pass through its gates. This is the story of how the camp was created, how it functioned, how women endured and resisted, and how its memory asks something of us. Still, Chapter 1, Blueprint of a Women's Camp. Ravensbrück was born from a larger project, the Nazi regime's rapid expansion of detention and annihilation sites after 1933. As Adolf Hitler consolidated power, the SS under Heinrich Himmler constructed camps to remove and destroy those deemed undesirable. By the late 1930s, overcrowding in existing camps and the regime's tightening grip on society led to a new idea: an entire concentration camp system designed for women. In 1938, the SS selected a site near the village of Ravensbrück, isolated enough to hide suffering, close enough to Berlin for easy administration and transport. The camp opened in May 1939. It began with roughly 18 long wooden barracks and room for only a few thousand prisoners. Very quickly, it became the hub of a web of sub-camps and satellite workshops. A small men's compound was added in April 1941, and the neighboring Uckermark Protective Custody Camp for teenage girls opened in mid-1942. In 1943, a crematorium rose inside the perimeter. By early 1945, a crude gas chamber stood nearby. A facility intended for around 6,000 inmates held more than 36,000 by war's end. Who was sent there? From the first transports, the SS filled Ravensbrück with people the regime feared or despised. Political prisoners, those labeled asocial, a sweeping category that captured Roma, Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, the work-shy, and the so-called race defilers. And as the war widened, women seized across occupied Europe. By 1942 to 43, large transports arrived from occupied Poland and the Soviet Union. Over time, more than 130,000 women and children and thousands of men were registered at Ravensbrück. The largest contingents were Polish and Soviet women, alongside Germans, Austrians, Hungarians, French, and others, resistance members, forced laborers, students, mothers, daughters, sisters. Commandants rotated: Günther Tomaszka in 1939, SS Hauptsturmführer Max Kögel from early 1940, and Fritz Düren from August 1942 until the Reich fell. Beneath them, the camp's bureaucracy included a political department, camp doctors, and a large corps of female SS overseers, the Aufseherinnen, trained on site. Across 6 years, thousands of women served as guards here, a fact that still unsettles visitors and historians alike. Chapter 2, Life Under the Wire. From the first hours, the routine stripped people of identity and agency. Prisoners, arriving, half naked and shorn, were driven into long roll calls before dawn, counting bodies for hours in snow or dust. Winter froze toes. Summer burned lungs full of grit. Breakfast, such as it was, could be thin coffee. Lunch meant watery soup. Supper was often a sliver of black bread. Faces hollowed, shoulders pinched. The body saved its feeblest energy for standing in line. Overcrowding and lice spread fever through the dim barracks. In time, one prefers to be a hermit rather than always among people, wrote Dr. Doris Mayes, a camp physician, her quiet line conveying the erosion of spirit that constant exposure to suffering brings. Labor was the camp's second instrument of control. The earliest prisoners built the camp itself, hauling materials and digging foundations under guard. As the war accelerated, so did the exploitation. Inside Ravensbrück, factory sheds multiplied. Women machined parts, stitched uniforms, knitted, wove, and tied cords under the watchful eyes of overseers. Beyond the fence, Siemens and Halske ran nearly 20 satellite workshops from 1942, where shackled prisoners assembled electrical components. The workday stretched from dawn into dark. Rations dwindled. A body already weakened by hunger broke under repetitive motion, cold, and blows. Those judged unfit for work were moved aside, a euphemism that often presaged disappearance. Everywhere, violence made the rules. Female SS guards patrolled the barracks and factory floors. Some arrived in crisp cuffs and embroidered collars, decorations that could not hide what followed. Prisoners developed a grim bet. How long before a newly arrived overseer shed any hesitation and embraced cruelty? The SS rewarded the most brutal. Among the guards who served at Ravensbrück were Maria Mandel, later senior overseer at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and a young Irma Grace, who trained here before becoming infamous as the hyena of Auschwitz. Slaps, kicks, and arbitrary punishments were the camp's grammar. Humiliation was its accent. Hunger itself became policy. As Germany faltered in late 1944, rations fell to starvation levels. Refuse pits became desperate hunting grounds. Women fainted at their machines, collapsed on roll call squares, or traded precious crumbs for a moment without blows. Sick lists lengthened. The line between survival and surrender thinned to the width of a crust. Chapter 3. Mechanics of Murder. Ravensbrück was also a killing site, built into the Nazi bureaucracy of annihilation. As early as 1941, transports left the camp for the T4 euthanasia program under Action 14 of 13. The sick, disabled, and those deemed unfit were selected, many sent to killing centers like Bernburg, where they were gassed. Inside the camp, shootings became routine around 1941 to 42. Prisoners were taken to a concrete wall behind the barracks, lined up, and executed. Mass graves spread beyond the perimeter. The most notorious crimes happened under a medical pretense. Himmler's personal physician, Dr. Karl Gebhardt, arrived to conduct experiments on women's legs. Bones deliberately broken or cut, wounds infected with bacteria, including tetanus and gas gangrene, and attempts to test sulfonamide drugs, all with dirty instruments, fetid bandages, and no true anesthesia. Many bled to death. Survivors lived with chronic pain and disability, some unable to walk again. Gebhardt's assistant, Dr. Herta Oberheuser, took part. She later stood in the dock at the Nuremberg doctor's trial. Other procedures included toxic injections presented as vitamins and sterilization trials on pregnant prisoners. Even summary descriptions are difficult to read. The purpose here is not gore, but recognition. Those women had names, and those names belong in history. By late 1944, as the Red Army closed in, killing accelerated. The SS erected a makeshift gas chamber beside the crematorium. From January to April 1945, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 women and around 100 men from the adjacent compound were murdered there with Zyklon B. Their bodies burned in the ovens. Selection became constant. New arrivals often Polish women transferred from Auschwitz and other camps, stumbled into the main gate, exhausted and half-naked. Those who looked strong were sent to labor. The elderly, the sick, the very young were marched toward showers and did not return. Lists of the chronically ill were compiled for the sole purpose of death. When Commandant Surin ordered evacuations, some 2,000 gravely ill women were left behind in the hospital. Soviet troops later found bodies stacked in the wards. Counting exact losses is difficult. Records were destroyed, chaos multiplied. But historians agree on the scale. At least 30,000 people perished at Ravensbrück, and many estimates run far higher when hunger, disease, shootings, medical murders, deportations to killing centers, and gassing are taken together. The camp lived by ledgers. The dead were its margins. Chapter 4. Sisterhood and Subversion. Against this machinery, women fashioned a counter-economy of care. They carved hiding spots for stolen potatoes, shared a cup of thin soup, and hummed forbidden songs that carried languages across bunks. They formed informal families in the barracks, older prisoners teaching the youngest how to conserve energy on roll call, how to avoid a guard's gaze, how to stretch a crust across a day. A crust slipped into a blanket was an oath. You are not alone. Many of the prisoners had resisted before arrest. They resisted again inside the fence. Sabotage bloomed in small, deniable acts, seams stitched to fail, threads cut, wires misrouted, parts swapped on assembly lines to slow the war machine by invisible degrees. Notes traveled between blocks on scraps of packaging. The French organized clandestine groups. Geneviève de Gaulle-Anthonioz, niece of Charles de Gaulle, became a beacon by sharing whispers of Allied advances, reminding despairing women that the outside world still moved toward liberation. Polish women, especially those sent after the Warsaw Uprising, preserved dignity under assault, sharing food, protecting the sick, and holding the line of language and memory. Anthropologist Germaine Tillion survived Ravensbrück and later wrote about the remarkable camaraderie that took root there. The phrase sounds quiet until you set it against the camp's purpose. Ravensbrück was engineered to atomize and degrade. The women's answer was to rehumanize one another, to mother strangers, to befriend the dying, to insist, as one survivor said, that even amid the cruelty, people must stay people. In a place built to make mercy seem foolish, they proved that mercy was a form of resistance. Chapter 5. Collapse, Liberation, and Memory. By spring 1945, the Reich crumbled. On orders from Himmler, the SS began emptying Ravensbrück. In April, roughly 7,500 weakened prisoners, mostly French, Norwegian, and Polish women, were evacuated under Red Cross protection to Sweden, Switzerland, and France in Count Folke Bernadotte's White Buses mission. For those left, Commandant Surin ordered a forced evacuation westward. Death marches that drove some 20,000 women and girls into the forests of Mecklenburg. Many fell by the roadside, some were shot, others vanished in the confusion. On April 30th, 1945, Soviet troops reached Ravensbrück. They found about 2,000 women too sick to move. Many guards had fled. A few were captured and turned over. Liberation behind Soviet lines meant that Ravensbrück's images did not flood Western newsreels as Bergen-Belson's did. Absence on film did not mean absence of suffering. In the weeks that followed, hundreds of liberated women died of disease and exhaustion. Dr. Moss and others needed months simply to stand, years to sleep without waking to remembered screams. After the war, came a partial reckoning. Karl Gebhardt was convicted and executed in 1948. Herta Oberheuser received a 20-year sentence. Fritz Surin was executed by a French tribunal in 1950. Irma Grese, who had trained at Ravensbrück and served later at Auschwitz-Birkenau and Bergen-Belsen, was hanged by the British at 22. Some guards melted into the chaos. Others, like Maria Mandel, were ultimately captured and punished. Justice was imperfect, but testimonies built a record that outlived perpetrators' denials. For decades, Ravensbrück stood in the shadow of larger, more filmed camps, yet survivors guarded its memory. Charlotte Delbo wrote of Ravensbrück and Auschwitz, in Auschwitz and After, insisting that the past be spoken plainly. Germaine Tillian published accounts in the 1950s and 1970s, arguing that remembering was an ethical act, a discipline against repetition. Today, the Ravensbrück Memorial marks quiet ground where towers once stood. Exhibits display the fragments that survive: a scorched shoe, a dented spoon, a piece of cloth. Guides recount the numbers: over 130,000 registered prisoners, including roughly 48,500 Poles and 28,000 Soviets. At least 30,000 dead, perhaps far more, but they return finally to individual names. A name is a person. A number is a symptom of what the camp attempted. Visitors often ask how a women's camp could also employ female guards. The answer is historical and human. Ideology made cruelty permissible. Daily choices made it personal. On one side of the wire, guards practiced dehumanization as routine. On the other, prisoners practiced care as refusal. The legacy of Ravensbrück is not only a record of crimes, it is a call to recognize what ordinary people can become under orders and what ordinary people can choose to be instead. Places like this ask questions no monument can answer for us. How will we see those labeled less than in our own time? What will we do when obedience and conscience split apart? Ravensbrück does not offer consolation. It offers witness. Out of the wire and floodlights came small, stubborn acts, a hidden potato, a misowned seam, a whispered update that the Allies were near, a hand around another's shoulder at roll call. Those gestures did not end the camp. They did something else. They kept humanity intact where humanity was meant to fail. If memory has work to do, it is this: to hold both truths together. Ravensbrück was a site of calculated brutality, and it was a site where women remade one another as sisters. To remember only the horror is to miss the courage. To remember only the courage is to forget the cost. The women of Ravensbrück left us both.